This is part 2 of a series on the Wild Heart pattern from Femme Broidery, which can be found for free at the DMC website. Femme Broidery is a really cool fiber art studio based out of Calgary, Canada that mixes sort of progressive politics, feminism, and botanicals together. If you like this pattern, I highly recommend checking out their Etsy store at www.etsy.com/shop/femmebroidery. And I will also put the link in the notes for this video. In part 1, I discussed what comes in a DMC downloadable pattern, and I stitched the stem stitch. Part 2 is going to be a much shorter video since I recorded this with a good chunk of it with my hands out of the focus and with the stitching out of the focus of the camera, so a lot of it was unusable. So right now I'm working on the back stitch. It's a really straightforward stitch that's typically used for outlining shapes in embroidery. If you've done any kind of sewing, you've likely have done a back stitch. And if you want to learn how to do a back stitch, there's lots of tutorials out there on YouTube. If you want one that's specifically for using it in embroidery, again, I recommend the tutorials from Cutesy Crafts. So in the last video I talked about how I didn't know how many strands I was going to do for the back stitch, and I decided to go ahead with a single strand, which is what is going to create this really thin line. And I'm not sure if I like it. I think I made an error when I decided to only use 3 strands for the stem stitch. I needed there to be a contrast in the thickness of my stem stitch when compared to the back stitch, since the lines for the stem stitch are more of the main lines of the pattern, but I don't think that the single strand is substantial enough. I'm not really sure if I like how it ended up looking. So I recommend following the pattern for this one and not going rogue the way that I did. Also, I'm noticing now that I didn't actually complete my stem stitching, and there's a few spots where I need to go back in and complete some of the branches coming off the heart. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the tools and materials that I'm using. So in addition to the DMC 25 floss, which is the black floss that I'm using, I have an embroidery needle. I use a pretty small needle. I can't remember exactly what size it is. I didn't even know that needles had regulated sizes until I started embroidery. And an embroidery needle is going to be different than a needlepoint needle. It has a sharp tip. Needlepoint needles have a blunt tip, which is perfectly fine for using with Aida cloth. But embroidery needles need to be sharper because you're usually stitching on something that's closer to a 28 count. I'm also using a pair of owl eye embroidery scissors from Sublime Stitching, quilting cotton in light gray, and a plastic 9-inch hoop that I got from Joann's. I prefer the plastic hoops from Joann's because I feel like I get better tension than with the wood hoops. Tension makes it easier to stitch and will make your stitching neater overall. And I also usually use a magnet that broke off from one of my refrigerator magnets that I use as a needle minder, but I lost it somehow in the last couple days, so I'm just using a pin cushion. And you can use any fabric that you like. You can embroider on anything from felt to, canvas from one of your reusable grocery bags. You could, embroider on denim, but typically you're going to be using something like a calico cotton, a muslin, or linen. I buy my fabric mostly from Joann's because that's what I have available to me, but I have also found fabric at the Dollar Tree. It's really awful polyester, but it still works if you're just kind of using something you want to do like a sampler and learn how to do some stitches. But here I'm using some quilting cotton. Alright, so that is the back stitch for the Wild Heart pattern. Next video I'm going to be showing you guys how I am going to be doing the chain stitch for the leaves.